Disregard appearances. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled and persist in that assumption. Those are Neville Goddard's words. And tonight, they may be all you need. What if you didn't have to fix your reality? What if your struggle to manifest, to visualize, to hold the vision, could all fall away, and in its place you simply rested in the knowing that it is done? Tonight, I want to give you something simple, not a technique to learn, not a mental exercise to master, just a shift, and a gentle one, into a different version of you. Because here's the truth, most people fall asleep rehearsing what's missing. They replay problems, they linger in lack, and without knowing it, they train their subconscious to keep returning to the same old pattern. But you're going to do something else tonight. You're going to step into the I've arrived state, a state where nothing is missing, nothing is wrong, and nothing is being chased. Just presence, completion, peace. And here's the beauty. You don't need to visualize, you don't need to strain. All you need to do is feel. Feel what it would be like if your desire were already real, and let that feeling cradle you as you drift into sleep. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to do it. You'll understand why it works. And most of all, you'll have the words to say tonight, just before you fall asleep. Words that don't try to convince the world, but remind you of what's already true. Let's begin. Manifestation starts by letting go. Most people approach manifestation with good intentions. They want change, they want relief, they want a different experience. But without realizing it, they bring the old reality with them into every new attempt. They try to create something new while still reacting to what's not working. They say the right words, visualize, script, even affirm, but deep inside they remain tied to the version of life they're trying to move away from. They check the bank account and feel lack. They look at their phone and feel alone. They go to sleep with the weight of the day still sitting in their chest. The problem isn't desire. It's the attention they keep giving to what they claim they no longer want. Here's the truth. Manifestation does not begin by fixing your current situation. It begins by releasing it. Not because you're ignoring reality, but because you no longer accept it as permanent. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means stepping out of a version of yourself that you've outlived. Neville Goddard said, "You cannot serve two masters. You cannot keep one foot in the version of you who lacks, and the other in the version of you who already has. You have to choose. To dwell in one state is to leave the other completely. That means you don't try to convince yourself. You don't keep looking for signs. You stop feeding the very thing you want to leave behind. It's like watching a movie you don't enjoy. You wouldn't get up and argue with the screen. You wouldn't try to fix the characters or rewrite the ending while the film is playing. You'd walk out of the theater, or you'd change the reel. What you see in the outer world is just a projection of your current assumptions. If you want something different, you don't keep adjusting the outer picture. You change the inner pattern it's coming from. And here's where most people hesitate, because the current reality feels so real, so loud, so convincing. But it's just an echo, an imprint of past assumptions. Neville said, "Truth depends upon the intensity of imagination, not upon facts." So even if the facts around you scream contradiction, your job is not to fix the facts. Your job is to stop claiming them as final. Letting go means withdrawing your emotional investment from the old version of life. It means no longer telling the same stories about what's not working. No longer asking, why hasn't it changed? No longer treating the outer world as a report card for your inner work. You step into a new identity, and you let that identity become the new source of your thoughts, your feelings, and your assumptions. This isn't about pretending, it's about deciding. You're not lying to yourself. You're choosing the state that matches what you desire, and you're letting go of every reaction that tries to pull you back. Ask yourself now, where in your life are you still reacting to the old story? Where are you trying to manage or explain a version of life you no longer want? It could be subtle, a small complaint, a lingering fear, a need to check, a habit of reviewing. All of those things keep you anchored to the state you're trying to leave. Letting go isn't always loud. Sometimes it's as simple as silence. You no longer argue. You no longer push. You stop needing the world to give you proof before you allow yourself to feel how you want to feel. And in that space, something changes. Not outside, but inside. The struggle drops. The effort fades. And you begin to feel what it's like to live from completion instead of striving. Neville said, "Your assumption to be effective cannot be a single isolated act. It must be a maintained attitude. That means you don't visit the state of the wish fulfilled. You remain there. Even when the world shows you something different, even when it feels uncomfortable, You keep returning to the state where it is already done. This is the real letting go, not of your desire, but of your loyalty to a version of yourself who was always waiting, always needing, always questioning. That version is not you anymore. So tonight, before you fall asleep, notice where your attention goes. Are you rehearsing problems or resting in possibility? Are you reliving lack or releasing it? Letting go is not a step in the process. It's the doorway. The moment you stop arguing with what is and start being who you choose to be, no matter what appears. You're not trying to make it happen. You're not trying to fix anything. You're simply deciding, I no longer belong to that story. I am not the person who doesn't have. I am not trying to become. I have arrived. And from that quiet place, everything begins to change. Enter the I've arrived state. There's a moment, just before sleep, when the mind becomes soft, unguarded. The body is still, the day begins to dissolve, and consciousness hovers in that quiet space between waking and dreaming. That's where real change takes root, and it's in this space that the I've arrived state becomes the most powerful thing you can access. This is not a ritual. It's not a technique in the traditional sense. It's a shift, a soft landing into a new identity. The question is simple. How would I feel if I already had everything I want? Not, how will I feel when it comes? Not, how do I make it happen faster? But, right now, if it were done, how would I feel? That question is your key. It moves you beyond the mind, beyond analysis, beyond the restless energy of seeking. It delivers you into a state where nothing is missing, where nothing needs to be chased. When you ask this question honestly and without effort, something begins to happen. You might feel a sense of calm rise in your chest, a soft exhale, a loosening of the grip you've been holding around the desire, not because you're giving up on it, but because, in that moment, you're no longer separate from it. You've arrived. This isn't about tricking yourself. You're not pretending. You're stepping into the only place where manifestation ever happens, the present. Not the future you hope to reach, the now you choose to occupy. Neville taught that the state of consciousness in which you sleep is the one that will externalize. He said, that which you feel yourself to be, you are, and you are given that which you are, not what you want, not what you wish for, but what you accept as already true. The I've arrived state is that acceptance, quiet, immediate, complete. So how do you enter it? You lie down, and instead of replaying the day or planning tomorrow, you ask yourself that one question. How would I feel if it were already mine? Let the answer come in feelings, not words. Let it come in silence. There's no need to visualize a scene. If you can, fine, but it's not required. This is not about seeing. It's about being. Imagine the kind of peace you might feel if all the waiting were over. Not because something changed outside, but because you've stopped waiting inside. That's the doorway, and what happens next may surprise you. The mind might resist. It might offer doubts or memories of lack. That's normal, but your job is not to fight those thoughts. You don't need to force anything. You simply return again and again to the feeling of arrival. This feeling is not always fireworks. It can be quiet, subtle, like sinking into warm water. A soft feeling of, I'm okay now. A sense that there's nothing left to prove. You'll know you've entered it when you're no longer trying to get there. You're no longer checking for signs. You're no longer reaching. You're just here, in this moment, complete. Neville often said that feeling is the secret. Not emotion, not excitement, but the inner conviction that you already are the one you wish to be. This is not a process of trying. It's a process of releasing resistance to what already is. Think of it this way. If someone handed you the keys to your dream home tonight, debt-free, fully furnished, fully yours, how would your body respond? What would soften? What would let go? That's the state. That's the shift. You're not affirming to convince yourself. You're not scripting to manifest. You're simply sitting in the seat of the person who no longer needs to reach for what is already theirs. That's the I've arrived state, and it's more than a moment before sleep. It's the foundation you begin to live from. The more often you enter this state, especially at night, the more natural it becomes. You begin to identify as someone who has, not someone who hopes. And as this becomes your emotional baseline, the outer world begins to bend in response. Not because you forced it, but because you became the person who no longer doubts. So tonight, when your head touches the pillow, let go of what didn't happen today. Let go of the questions. Let go of the old roles you've been rehearsing. Ask the one question that matters. How would I feel if it were already mine? Let the answer come, not from your thoughts, but from your state. Let it change the rhythm of your breath. Let it soften the edges of your body. Let it be enough. You are not reaching anymore. You are remembering. You've arrived. Take a moment. If this has you questioning what's real, you're exactly where you need to be. There's something waiting for you in the pinned comment. Something filled with the kind of words that don't just inspire, but remind. Remind you of what you already are. If Neville's message speaks to you, it's worth a glance. Now, let's continue, because the next idea may change how you see your past, and how easily you can rewrite it. There's a common misunderstanding in the world of manifestation, that you must see clearly in order to create clearly. That if you can't build a vivid mental movie, your desire won't materialize. That the sharper your imagination, the stronger your results. But Neville Goddard never taught that visualization was the requirement. He taught that feeling was the secret. You do not need to see the scene. You need to be the person. For those who find visualization difficult, those who say, I try, but I can't picture anything, this is not a weakness. It's not a blockage. It's a doorway into something even more powerful. The inner tone of fulfillment. Because what truly shapes your outer world is not what you can imagine with your eyes closed, but what you can feel in your body and hold in your state of being. Neville said, the world is a mirror, forever reflecting what you are doing within yourself. That reflection doesn't come from mental images alone. It comes from the assumption behind those images, the emotional atmosphere you're living in. So if you can't visualize a car, a home, or a partner in detail, it doesn't matter. But if you can access the feeling of freedom, of being loved, of being supported, you've already begun to impress your subconscious. Let's take a simple example. Imagine someone trying to manifest financial stability. They close their eyes and attempt to picture a bank account, but the numbers won't appear. The image is fuzzy. Their mind wanders. They assume they've failed. But if that same person simply leans back, breathes deeply, and allows themselves to feel what it would be like to be free of financial stress, to feel calm, clear, even slightly relieved, that shift in feeling is more powerful than any detailed picture, because in that moment, they've stopped being the one who wants and started being the one who already has. This is what Neville meant by living in the end. Not imagining the outer event perfectly, but embodying the inner conclusion. It is done. Feeling does not need to be dramatic. It's not about tears or excitement. It's about certainty, a quiet knowing, a mood, a tone. It's the feeling you have when something is no longer a question. Think of how you feel when you've already eaten and someone offers you more food. You don't feel hungry. You don't have to say no with force. There's no inner conflict. You're full. You simply aren't in the state of wanting anymore. That's what it's like to shift into the fulfilled state. You don't have to talk yourself into it. You just aren't reaching anymore. Neville also reminded us that when we assume a state, even one without visible proof, the world begins to conform. So the question becomes, what state are you maintaining when you think nothing is happening? Are you living in the state of, it hasn't worked yet? Or are you returning again and again to the feeling of, this is already mine? You don't need to build a movie in your mind. You just need to accept the emotional tone of the wish fulfilled and let it live in you as naturally as breathing. For those who like language, you can even use short phrases to reinforce this feeling. Not affirmations in the sense of repetition to force belief, but soft acknowledgments of what's already true in the state you've entered. Phrases like, I feel clear, it's already mine, there's nothing to prove, this is who I am now. These are not tools to convince. They are expressions of alignment. They flow from the state, not into it. And if no words come, that's fine too. Silence can be a container for the most powerful assumptions. So what's important isn't what you see, it's what you're being. Because being includes everything. Your tone, your breath, your posture, your reactions, your expectations. And those things are always shaping your world, whether you're visualizing or not. Let go of the pressure to paint mental pictures. Let go of the belief that you're doing it wrong if the scene doesn't come. You are never limited by the image. You are empowered by the feeling. And that feeling is available now. Always now. So tonight, when you rest into sleep, ask not, can I see it? But can I feel it? Can I touch, even for a moment, the quiet sense that I am already living as the one I've chosen to become? If you can feel that, without a single image, you've already stepped into the state. The rest is just reflection. Use the I remember when method. Some desires feel close, almost within reach. Others feel distant, too big, too different from the life we're living now. And for many, that mental gap between where they are and where they want to be becomes the very block that slows everything down. This is where Neville Goddard's I remember when method becomes invaluable. It's deceptively simple, but don't let that fool you. It is one of the most subtle and effective tools for shifting your inner identity without triggering resistance. Here's how it works. Instead of affirming I am wealthy when you don't feel it, or I am in a loving relationship when your reality contradicts it, you speak from the version of you who has already lived through the struggle and come out the other side. You say, I remember when money was tight. I remember when I felt invisible. I remember when I was waiting, hoping something would finally change. The moment you speak in this way, you reposition your current challenge as something that already happened. Not something you're stuck in, not something you're fighting, but something you've moved beyond. It's subtle, but powerful. You're not lying. You're not forcing belief. You're simply allowing your subconscious to accept a new frame, that this moment you're in now is already part of your past. And once the subconscious accepts something as the past, it stops identifying with it as who you are now. Neville said, to be transformed, the whole basis of your thoughts must change. And nothing rewrites the basis of thought more gently than rephrasing your present condition as a memory. This method is especially useful for the analytical mind, the part of us that's always evaluating, checking for proof, doubting. Why? Because it doesn't ask the mind to believe something outrageous. It just asks it to recall a version of life, as if it's no longer happening. And even if the outer situation hasn't changed yet, this shift in language begins to soften the inner resistance. Try it with something you've struggled with for a while. Instead of saying, I am confident, you say, I remember when I doubted myself in every room I walked into. Immediately, your brain begins to reorganize. It no longer clings to the old identity. It begins to adopt the tone of someone who has grown, someone who now stands in a different place. And here's the key. As you do this, add compassion, not judgment, not regret. Speak about your former self with warmth. I remember when I used to try so hard to be chosen. I didn't know then that I already was enough. This adds depth. It helps the subconscious not only release the old identity, but heal from it. And that healing clears space for a new emotional state to emerge. You're not just changing your language, you're redefining the meaning of your past. You're saying, that was a chapter, but it's not the whole book. The I remember when method works because it affirms that change has already occurred. It places your desire not in the future, but in the now, because only someone who has changed can look back. This approach bypasses the inner resistance that often comes with traditional affirmations. When we say things we don't yet believe, the subconscious often pushes back. It resists being told that something is true when the outer world still reflects the opposite. But when we reframe the old as memory, there's nothing to resist. It's like recalling a childhood home. It doesn't matter that you no longer live there. It exists, but it's behind you. That's what you're doing here. You're placing lack, loneliness, and fear behind you, not by denying them, but by honoring them and leaving them in the past. This practice doesn't require a long script. Just a few sentences spoken internally before sleep can shift your entire state. I remember when I used to feel like it was never going to happen. I remember when I used to check my phone hoping they would reach out. I remember when I felt like I had to fight for every little thing. Let the tone be gentle, not dramatic. Let the words come from the version of you who is already living beyond that struggle. This is not about rehashing the past. It's about reclaiming the authority to place it in its rightful place, behind you. Neville didn't just teach techniques. He taught states of being. And the I remember when method is not just a trick of language, it's a way to shift your identity without resistance. Because identity is what creates, and once you begin to see your current struggle as something you've moved through, you stop recreating it. You begin to feel what it's like to be someone who has. And from that state, manifestation becomes effortless. Because you are no longer reaching for change, you're remembering that it's already occurred. Once you've entered the I've arrived state, once you've allowed yourself to rest in the feeling that your desire is already fulfilled, then, and only then, you may begin to introduce specific details, but never before. Why? Because specifics introduced from a state of lack tend to amplify the very feeling of not having. They turn into wishing, into grasping, into emotional tension. But specifics layered onto a foundation of fulfillment only deepen the sense of ownership. They make the new state more textured, more real, more emotionally grounded. Neville taught, your assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. But that assumption must be allowed to take root in feeling, not in mental effort. So once you've relaxed into the sense that your desire is already true, you can allow the mind to bring in soft details, not as proof, not as evidence, but as natural expressions of your new identity. Let's say your desire is financial freedom. Once you've entered the feeling of relief and security, let a simple thought arise. Now I pay bills early without thinking twice. Or, I see my balance, and it just feels normal to see that number. Notice how it's not about imagining stacks of cash or winning the lottery. It's about normalizing a lived emotional experience. The specifics you introduce don't need to be exaggerated. They need to feel natural, ordinary even, or take a desire for love. After resting in the feeling of being loved and chosen, you might allow a detail to surface like, they send me messages just to check in, because that's who they are. Or, we cook dinner together, and I don't overthink anything. It just flows. This is not about building an elaborate scene. It's about anchoring the emotional tone with subtle points of familiarity. Not to make it more real, but because it's already real in the state you've chosen, and these details reflect what that version of you would expect. If you try to begin with the detail before accessing the state, it can become forced. It creates tension. You'll find yourself wondering, what if this never happens? How will this come to pass? And those questions only echo one thing, the assumption that it isn't yours yet. But if you lead with the state and then introduce detail, there's no tension. You're not trying to create. You're simply remembering. This is where specificity becomes powerful, not because it makes the scene vivid, but because it helps you become emotionally consistent. Consistency in the state is what matters, not the visual, not the dialogue, the state. So if you've entered the I've arrived feeling, and you want to gently reinforce it with detail, choose moments that feel quietly obvious to the version of you who has already arrived. I fall asleep with peace, not questions. My phone feels different now. It's no longer a symbol of waiting. I don't count the money anymore. I just live. These kinds of statements aren't dramatic. They reflect someone who is no longer chasing. They reveal the ordinary texture of a reality that is already integrated. And it's that ordinariness that makes the subconscious accept them even more deeply. Neville said, all transformation begins with an intense, burning desire to be transformed. But what sustains the transformation is not intensity, it's stability. And stability comes from learning to live in the state of the wish, fulfilled not as a fantasy, but as a familiar rhythm. That's why layering in specifics after you've settled into the state is so powerful. It lets you begin to embody the desire as real, lived, natural. So don't start by scripting out every detail of your dream life. Start by arriving. Start by resting in the state where it's already done. And from there, allow the details to come, not as demands, but as reflections, not as requirements, but as confirmations of a reality already chosen. That's when the inner world becomes so coherent, so emotionally anchored, that the outer world has no choice but to follow. Surrender into sleep. The final minutes before sleep are not just a closing of the day, they're an opening into the subconscious. What you feel in this quiet space is not lost, it is planted. Neville Goddard called it the state akin to sleep, and he taught that this drowsy, impressionable moment holds the greatest power for change. Not because you force a thought, but because resistance fades. The conscious mind softens. The gate to the subconscious opens. This is not the time to replay the day's problems or question whether your desire is coming. It's the time to gently return to the state of the wish fulfilled. No tension, no trying, just resting in the emotional reality of, it is done. Neville said, feel the reality of the state sought, and live and act upon this conviction. When you surrender into sleep from that state, not with effort but with acceptance, you impress the subconscious directly. That impression shapes tomorrow. So ask yourself before sleep, am I drifting off as the one who still waits, or as the one who has already received? If your mind wanders, bring it back, not with pressure but with a simple feeling, the feeling of arrival, the feeling of peace, the feeling of no longer needing anything to change. Sleep then becomes more than rest. It becomes alignment, and the outer world in time will reflect that inner stillness. Not because you forced it, but because you became it. Consistency matters. Transformation does not come from occasional moments of clarity. It comes from consistency, showing up night after night in the same inner state, regardless of what the outer world is doing. This isn't about intensity. You don't need emotional fireworks. You don't need to feel it hard enough. What matters is repetition, rhythm, a quiet commitment to return to the feeling, even when it seems nothing is changing. Because your outer world is not shaped by what you do once. It reflects what you most often assume to be true. Neville Goddard said, "The world is a mirror, forever reflecting what you are doing within yourself, and what you do within yourself most consistently becomes the life you live." That's why one night of stepping into the "I've arrived" state is powerful, but it's not enough by itself. The shift becomes real when it becomes normal. 5 minutes before sleep, that's all it takes. 5 minutes to ask, how would I feel if it were already mine? To settle into that feeling, to speak gently from your new identity. I remember when I used to worry about this. And then, to sleep in that state. Not once, not just tonight, but again tomorrow, and the night after that. Until this way of thinking stops feeling like practice and starts feeling like home. The repetition is not just about forming a habit, it's about changing who you believe yourself to be. Each night, you are reinforcing a new version of you. Each night, you are softening the grip of old assumptions. Each night, you are choosing peace over effort, completion over striving. This is how manifestation becomes inevitable, not because of a single powerful moment, but because you kept choosing the end over and over until it chose you back. That's the real secret. Not intensity, not perfection, just consistency. Let's do a guided practice before sleep. Let everything settle. Let the day fall behind you. Let your breath become slower, softer. Now ask yourself, without needing to answer it with words, how would I feel if I already had everything I want? Let the feeling rise. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's ease. Maybe it's simply the absence of needing anything to be different. Let that feeling surround you, not because you're trying to manifest, but because you've chosen to remember. Gently say within yourself, I remember when I struggled. I remember when I wasn't sure. That version of me tried so hard, and I love them for it, but I'm no longer there. You are not asking. You are not waiting. You are resting in what already is. There is nothing more to do tonight. You've arrived. Let that be enough. You don't need to force change. You don't need to visualize perfectly. You only need to feel what it's like to already have the life you desire. Let go of the version of you who waits. Begin sleeping as the one who has received. Use I remember when, not to relive the past, but to release it. Fall asleep tonight in the state of the wish fulfilled, not hoping but knowing. This isn't about effort, it's about alignment. Practice this again tomorrow. Make it your rhythm. Let it become normal. And if this has shifted something in you, stay with it. You are already that which you want to be. Now sleep knowing it, and let the world reflect back what you've accepted within. And before you go, there's something waiting in the pinned comment. If Neville's teachings speak to something deeper in you, don't miss what's there. One idea, one sentence, one quote at the right moment can change everything. Check the pinned comment. You'll know why when you see it.